Well, I normally take 30 minutes for my shoot down, but I can probably condense it somewhat. Yeah, I was leading a flight of 3 SAM interdiction, we knew there were SAM sites there, and I was a flak suppressor and SAM suppressor, a surface-to-air missile. And that left me in a position of vulnerability out at about 20,000 feet just off the entrance to Haiphong Harbor, while the people I was flying cover for, which was a flight of photo F-8 Crusaders, were positioning and then making their run down the shipping at Haiphong Harbor. I had a rather sophisticated, at the time, set of receivers on the airplane, and I could hear the SAM radars come up and could tell what they were doing by the different tones. And then I knew that they had fired one, and I looked down and I could see it coming up. Actually, at first I thought it was a street light, which was pretty uncommon. They never had any lights on down there, but it was a very dark afternoon with thunderstorms all around and heavy clouds, except right over Haiphong. And I saw this light, and again, for a few seconds I thought, boy, that's really strange, the light down there. And then I noticed that it wasn't moving. As I was moving around, it was staying in the same relative position, and it was getting a little bit brighter and a little bit bigger. And that's when I realized it was a surface-to-air missile. And I alerted the rest of my flight, and that's that's perhaps misrepresenting it. I choked the words out, missile in the air, missile in the air, and I have the tape of that somewhere, which is, that's when I realized I wasn't as cool as I'd like to have been. It was coming right at my flight. So I maneuvered into position, and I had a Shrike missile, which was anti-radar radar, and I fired that at the site that had fired the missile at me, and I saw it guiding properly as it left the aircraft. So I knew it was going to be a good hit unless they shut down, which they sometimes did if they saw us fire. And it went on in and tracked in and hit the missile site. And in the meantime, I was sitting up at about 225 knots or so, which is extremely slow in a combat environment, very vulnerable, a thing coming right at me. And so I positioned and called my wingman. We were going to make a run, a bombing run, or I had rockets, so I was going to make a rocket run on the place, and we subsequently did that. I fired 4 Zuni rockets into the site, and I spread them all over the SAM site, and I hit missiles and trailers, the guidance trailers that were on the ground, and the missiles were snaking around on the ground. And it was pretty exciting and rewarding for a combat pilot, because you're always, if you're going to be in combat, your whole idea is to destroy things. And I seemed to be doing a good job at that. But as I started my pullout, I felt a violent hit on the airplane. Saw a flash, and my fire warning light went off, and I was in the pullout, so I just kept that on. I was headed inland, which I didn't really want to be if I was going to lose an airplane. So I got turned around and switched over from rockets to bombs and called my wingman, let's put some bombs on them on the way out. And as I executed my turn, I started losing things. I lost my oxygen, I lost electrical, and realized I was not going to be able to do a proper bomb run, so I pulled off with the emergency jettisoned everything on the bottom of the airplane, bombs, tanks, everything I had, which made the airplane fly a whole lot faster and easier. And I started climbing out to Haiphong Harbor because I wanted to be in a position where if I did have to get out, that one of our helicopters could pick us up. I was climbing from I had been hit at about, I guess, 2,500 to 3,000 feet. Climbing out now, I got up to about 5,500 feet, figuring I might make it out of there. And about that time, the control stick moved all the way to the right front corner, and the right rudder pedal went all the way to the right, and the airplane started an uncommanded rudder roll. So I was just along for the ride at that point. I consider I was at full power and had been. I was going pretty fast for an A4. And as the airplane rolled around, the nose dropped a lot, and as it did, I ended up about 45 degrees nose down at full power. I considered pulling the power back, but if you pull the power back at that speed, you're going to go forward in the seat. You go forward in the seat, and when that rocket fires, you're probably going to break your back. So I just left the power up. And consequently, by the time, for some reason, I wanted to go out wings level, upright, not inverted. So I waited until I get through the whole pattern. I was upright and reached up and pulled the curtain. I had ejected a couple of months prior to that from a combat hit, but at slow speed. I was about 200 knots out near the ship. This time, the last time I looked at the airspeed indicator, I was doing 550 knots, and the needle was coming up very rapidly. So in terms of miles per hour, by the time I got out, I was well in excess of 600 miles an hour, which was outside the ejection envelope for that particular aircraft. I remember everything after that in minute detail, which is why it takes me so long normally to tell this story. But the canopy came off, the seat fired. Again, I was aware of every microsecond of this. As the seat traveled up the rails, I felt the air cutting down across my body just like a knife. It was incredible. Plus, going from the silence of the cockpit, because we're climate controlled, completely enclosed cockpit, quiet in there, and now suddenly it was like the hounds of hell all around me, a tremendous noise. I went up the rails on the seat. I had set the seat up after I'd been hit so that I was expecting a different kind of scenario, and I had set it up so that when I exited the aircraft, I would be kicked out of the seat immediately or be separated from the seat, and that's what happened. As soon as the seat stopped firing, I separated from the seat. Doing over 600 miles an hour. So there was nothing to protect me, and of course I had had my arms up to the face curtain and pulled it down like so, and it was covering my face, but so the effect of that is as soon as I reached the outside air, first the left elbow caught the air, and it brought it around, and immediately dislocated and severely broke the left shoulder. The little knobs on the humeral head broke off. Right now I've forgotten what they call them, but they broke off and ground around. We determined this later. Ground around in there in that cavity. And that twisted me to one side, and then the wind caught my right shoulder or right elbow and brought that up, and the same thing happened on the right side. So with both shoulders severely dislocated and broken, with those pieces of bone being ground around inside there, the pain was, as I tell the doctors now, you know, when you go to see a doctor, they're usually asking us, so what level of pain are you experiencing right now on a scale of 1 to 10? And I always laugh at them. I say, you have no idea what 10 is. So I try to put it in terms they can understand. The pain was incredible. The forces were unbelievable. I broke a leg at the same time, again with both arms flailing around as I was slowing down from the speed I had reached down to probably 400 or so before the chute opened. And I was acutely aware of the backpack opening up, the chute coming out, and the lines unfurling. I could feel all of that, hear some of it, and was well aware of it. And then when the chute opened, that was quite a shock. It didn't hurt me, as I recall, but it really was an intense opening shock. Then things slowed down, and that's when I became aware of the sounds of the war going on around me. I could hear noises that I didn't quite understand. It sounded like bombs were going off around me. Well, in fact, it was anti-aircraft shells going by me, supersonic. And so you hear the sound they make as they break the sound barrier. And then, of course, some of them were going off near me and near my wingman. So there were a lot of explosions around me. And I had more to worry about at that time. I opened my eyes and I was blind, completely blind. Now, most aviators value their eyesight more than any other thing, almost any other thing. And so I thought, well, boy, this is not good. But I'd been through such an experience, I couldn't be sure just what had happened. I mean, I knew what I thought I knew about what had happened, but then training kicked in, and I went up. The first thing you're going to do is grab your oxygen mask and get rid of that. Well, I came up, an oxygen mask is normally sticking off the front of the helmet out to about here, and you would grab it, release it, and throw it away. I kept coming up, there was nothing there. Up and up and up. And then I reached something that was very smooth and seemed to me to be wet. And that's when I thought, now I know why I'm blind. My face had been wiped off. Now, whether that's a sensible conclusion or not, it's the conclusion I came to. I thought, well, okay, this is going to be tough to deal with. I can't see, I'm hurting all over. All right. Got to do something about this. So I touched it and moved around a little bit, and I don't think that's me. And I reached over a little bit farther, and here was my oxygen mask over my right shoulder. So I unclipped that, threw it away. And I was having a lot of trouble moving this arm around. I didn't know why, but it was dislocated. I finally found the edge of my helmet and moved it around, and suddenly I could see. And it was just, all this happened pretty quickly, I think, because I was looking down, and I was looking right at this boiling hole in the water where my airplane had just gone in. But I tell you, that being able to see again and knowing that I wasn't blind was one of the greatest feelings I've ever had, ever. So I said, well, at least I'm not blind, so I got something I can work with. And then I had tried to come up with both hands for my helmet to get it around, and I was getting nothing out of the left arm except tremendous pain, constant pain. I said, well, all right, what's going on here? So I looked out, and things looked strange. I wore marine fatigue, so I was wearing a dark green shirt, and then over that was a torso harness, and normally you'd look out and you'd see the torso harness and then the green sleeve sticking out of that, and in this case I saw nothing but the loose edge of the torso harness, no shoulder. Now, I was having trouble dealing with that, so I said, well, okay, still got to get on with business here, so lift that hand up so I can see what's going on. Well, I had to consciously will my hand to come up, and when I looked at it, it came up from behind me. My arm was on backwards. There was this big lump in my chest under the torso harness, which, as it turns out, that was the humeral head, the bone in my arm. Okay, well, so we'll just tune that out. We can't use it, and it's not going to matter right now. I got more important things to take care of. So I just willed that to just hang by my side as best it could. I knew it was back there somewhere. And then I had to start worrying about hitting the water because I had ejected at about 5,000 feet, and all of this took some time. Of course, I hurtled through the air until the chute opened. That took some while. But now as I was approaching the water, the wind was blowing 15 or 20 knots, which is not the way you want to go in with two good arms, let alone two bad ones. But you take what comes. So I wanted to keep my radio as my most valuable piece of survival equipment. If I had a chance of getting picked up, it was probably going to be hooked to that radio. So that was in a pocket on my torso harness. I got it out and tried to stuff it in a place where I could get to it very quickly. But I was approaching the water in a hurry, and that wasn't working, so I just let it hang on my chest, and I gripped the antenna with my mouth, with my teeth, and waited for the hit. And I figured, well, maybe I'd be able to hang on to it that way. Well, I did when I hit, and of course everything doubled up, and it drove the antenna up and into the roof of my mouth. It didn't penetrate anything, but it, it made it uncomfortable. In the meantime, on the way down, that's when I'd first gotten the radio out, and I had told my wingman, I couldn't hear them, but I said, hey, I'm alive, I'm okay, and I said, don't pick me up. I had worked out a system, which I won't get into, it would take too long, but about in-flight pickup in a combat environment, and we had briefed it as we were briefing for the mission, and they were supposed to come around and try to pick me up. And I told them, don't do that, because I figured I was in enough trouble. They'd probably kill me trying. Anyway, I hit the water really hard and went deep. I had actually looked up after the chute had opened, and I got my helmet straightened out, and 2.5 gores in the parachute were blown out from the chute opening. It was that severe. A gore is a triangular shaped piece that the parachute's made out of, and 2.5 of those are gone, just flapping in the wind. So I came down harder and faster than I normally would have. Got underwater, and that 15 or 20 knots of wind up there caught the parachute and took off, dragging me underwater like a torpedo. And had it not been for the ingenuity of somebody somewhere in the Navy system to have very recently put a fix on our parachutes, I would have drowned. But they had put these deflation pockets on the outer edge of the canopy rim that when the edge of the canopy would touch the water as the wind was pulling it along, those deflation pockets would pick up water and collapse the canopy, and that's exactly what happened. So that saved my life. I eventually popped to the surface, and I'm spluttering and whatever. I tried to inflate my survival vest, and only one toggle would work. So I ended up with half inflation on the vest and floating at about chin level in the water with 15 or 20 knots of wind blowing. So I was swallowing a lot of water, having difficulty getting breaths. And I looked around, and there were 3 fishing vessels, junk type, well, not junks, but they were workboats, Vietnamese workboats that were down in my vicinity. And I could see them all heading to, before I landed, could see all headed to where I was going to hit. Once I popped to the surface down there, I looked up and I could see them coming, but I was working hard on trying to stay alive, and it was all I could do, and pretty soon I could feel the chute pulling me down. It had wrapped around my legs and was pulling me down. And with my shoulders being totally useless, there wasn't anything I could do about it. I couldn't reach my knife to cut loose from it. I couldn't do anything. So I was just waiting to die, and then I heard this voice in Vietnamese screaming something. And I looked around, and the closest vessel to me he had an AK-47 pointed directly at me, and he was maybe 75 feet away. And he was screaming, very upset, and there were 2 other guys on the boat, and they were yelling too, and they both had guns as well. The captain was heading the vessel up so it would be alongside me, headed up into the wind and not be going anywhere. And this guy was indicating I should put my hands up. Well, I said some obscene things about that. I didn't think too highly of his suggestion, plus I couldn't do it anyway. And I said, you better shoot me. You better either get me now or shoot me, because I'm not going to last much longer. And I was having to tip my head way back to get a breath of air as it was. And I can remember very clearly thinking, I wonder what it'll feel like. I wonder if I'll feel the bullets when they hit. I mean, very calmly. What are you going to do, you know? I equate this to somebody falling off a roof in a Hollywood movie, you know, they're screaming all the way at the ground. No. You're falling off the roof, you know you're going to die, and you say, ah, shit. Just typical. And that's kind of the way I was. Whatever you're going to do, you better do. And about that time, I felt something behind me, and this other vessel had pulled up behind me, and they grabbed me and tried to pull me aboard. Well, of course, I weighed a ton because I had all this chute that was hooked in the water below me. And they gradually got most of that off, and they pulled me aboard, and then they hacked at it with machetes to get all my clothing off me. And they got me down to just my underwear, and quickly they tied a rope around my arm and shoved me in the hold of the boat and put the hatch cover down on top of me. Well, there was about 1.5 feet of water in the in the boat, and I was sure I was going to drown there because my head was in it, and my feet were up sticking out the hatch, and my arms were useless. So I thought it was. There were several times that day I thought it was all over. So that was my introduction to life in Vietnam.
Wow. You're an amazing storyteller, sir. Really amazing. Yeah. I'm just going to fix something.
Well, the story makes it easy. Plus, I've told it a couple thousand times.
The first purpose of the Vietnamese interrogation is military intel.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding is pilots only have attack codes for 7 days out, so you have limited intel you can actually share with them. You're not versed in the electronics of the fighter jet. I mean, you know what they provide for you, but you don't necessarily know how to build them or
Oh, no, yeah.
or anything like that.
Yeah, we didn't have anything of any value.
Exactly. So one of the things that is consistent among all the former POWs I've talked to was when the shift for interrogation moves to, what I would say is that the Vietnamese had a systematic program of humiliation. They wanted to break you for
Mm-hmm.
reasons. And perhaps the most pernicious part of it, beyond the horrors of the torture, was when you were thrown in a cell alone, having been forced to go beyond the 4 precepts of the Geneva Convention, and you had to reveal more to survive. In each of you in that moment felt, as Charlie, or as Reed McCleary said to me once, Patrick, I lay in my cell for 1.5 years weeping, thinking to myself I could not return to my country, that I had betrayed my country. And, you know, this moment, this abject moment, is where you're reduced down to they have conquered you.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the story doesn't end there, because it's through many means, but one of them through the tap code and others, you begin to find mutual forgiveness as well as self-forgiveness. And it's this transition, this metamorphosis from this dark night of the soul to this place where you begin to find ways together to resist that battle behind bars that you fought so valiantly. So speak to me, if you can, sir, of one of the things that future warriors ask these questions on the sports field and classrooms and training and in the field is, how do I recover from failure? What was the moment that led to that moment of self-rebuke, and what was the first beginnings of relief from that?
I don't know that I can reduce it to one particular moment, time, or even set of circumstances. Initially, as you've learned, you feel, okay, I'm weak. I'm the only weak sister here. Everybody else is John Wayne, and I failed. And that's devastating because we all grew up watching John Wayne movies, and John Wayne never failed. And then how we dealt with it after that was an individual thing. And I mean, it was pretty extreme for some people, and others was just, well, hey, you know, you go on and do the best you can. The best way out was to get that redemption you're speaking of from others, so that, that's not the word I want, but the acknowledgement that they too have been through it. They know what you're going through. It's happened to them as well, and to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and do what you have to do, which later on we came to see in the guidance of our leaders, CAG Stockdale, primarily, is resist. These days, resist is, in my experience, is not a really great concept, but in those days, for what we were resisting, it was pretty important. In other words, you're not always going to win, but take all you can. When you can't take it anymore, you're not going to have any control over what you give them, what they take from you. But
Sorry, sir. Okay, go ahead.
But as quickly as you can, resume a resistance posture. And any level of resistance counts, whether it be the greatest resistance, you know, to death, or the slightest resistance to get you through the next minute. We had to resist, and it was that guidance in our own experience which led us to an understanding of just who we were and where we were and what was going on, and helped us to deal with it.
So one of the key points you're making there that's so important is the compassion that others, I know that the first order of business when a new shoot down would appear is get to him, get his name, get his rank, and then help him through that moment, and get him the tap code, get him a way to communicate. The tap code was in full effect by the time you were shot down. Is that correct, sir? And what was the first time that you experienced, after your shoot down, communication from another American? How did it come about?
I don't recall any communication at Heartbreak, which was the 7 cells. They put me in there with another pilot, another Navy pilot, Dean Woods, without whom I probably would not have made it, because my arms didn't work. I couldn't feed myself, not that we had much to eat. I couldn't take care of my hygiene in any way, shape, or form. So the only communication I had was with Dean at that time, and again, he saved my life by being there. Somebody had to be there. I would have made it. After that, when I was moved to the zoo, the first communication was a scratching on the wall, and I had no idea how the building was laid out or anything else. But then I heard a very distinctive tap, shave, and a haircut, which to an American is pretty meaningful. I had not realized how much so, but you know, he just responded. I heard shave and a haircut, and I go 2 bits, and then this frantic tapping started on the other side of the wall, which I had no idea what that was all about. I realized it was some sort of communication, but it wasn't on my frequency. So, long story short, we ended up, after hours of painful work, finally going one tap, and then you'd acknowledge that. And then there's two taps, acknowledge that, and pretty soon we got the idea, okay, we're going to go to 26 for Z here. It's going to be pretty laborious. You want to learn my name, it's going to take 10 or 15 minutes to get it across. But that's how we started. And after that was established, so then we knew that there was somebody there, and we got names as best we could and a little bit about the background. Then we had to develop or learn this new code. I don't recall exactly how it came to me. I think in the zoo at that time, in the barn, which is the building that I was in, there was a wash house there that they took us to empty our bowls, and I don't know that we got to wash up in there, but anyway, somebody would write out the tap code on a piece of toilet paper and leave it in a place for us to find, which was very dangerous for the person leaving it, and often they got caught doing that. But in my case, anyway, we did get the code, we learned it, and then we started using it. It takes a little while to get used to, but you get pretty fast after a while. When there's nothing else cluttering your brain, you can learn important stuff in a hurry.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Patrick,
Yes, sir.
one quick thing. Carrie, would you do something for me? There's a wind chime out on that porch. Can you just lower that? Thank you. I hear it occasionally. Thank you. It's the first time we've used it as a studio, so we're still getting all the bugs out.
Couldn't prove it by me.
Thank you.
So this kind of represents the first few moments of climbing out of the darkness. You've broken, in your estimation, you've broken under torture. You've revealed more than the code. And warriors have a code. Perhaps we learn from better instructors than us or great mentors the code of honor, but warriors have a code. It's a code of you gotta count on each other. You gotta have someone who can, you evaluate to know whether someone will cover your back. You've got it's an instinctive code among groups of warriors. So there was a kind of double indemnity then, because in this breaking under torture, you feel that you've betrayed your country code as well as your warrior's code. So this feeling of the break in the sense of self-honor. Yet you were all honorable men. You proved it again and again and again. You were all warriors. You proved it again and again and again. You put us before self again and again and again. The brotherhood that you share is extraordinary. So speak to me, sir, if you can, about the transition that happened over time from how do you go from that break, which you've said in part, the first thing is get someone else to tell you, hey, we're in this together. We've done this too. We failed. Now let's look at the ways we can resist. Tell me about the evolution of what you came to understand as the code of conduct and how you adapted it for circumstances on the ground with your leadership to the circumstances you were dealing with.
That's a very valid point. The code of conduct and its application to us over there was a source initially of, this is what we'll fall back on, this is what's expected of us, and so forth. But then it was a source of great confusion too, because it became immediately obvious that we couldn't live by it. We could try, we could do the best we could, but we couldn't live by it. And the type A personality that most of us had would say, well, it's black and white. You either live by it or you don't. If you don't, you don't count. Well, we had to find that there were shades of gray in there. And some did that, and most, I think, came to realize that, and some never did. They said, oh, it's the code of conduct, come hell or high water. How they adhered to that in their own private circumstances with interrogators and like, I don't know. We're dealing, after all, with human beings and all individuals from different backgrounds. Some people talk a big game and don't play too well. And then there's a strong silent type that don't talk about it and they play it extraordinarily well. And there's everybody in between. I think most of us were somewhere in between. It was difficult because we all had been trained in the code of conduct, and that was what we fell back on, trying to live it, but we couldn't. And I must say also the demands were different on some people than on others. Depending upon when in the war you were shot down, how many people they were processing at the time, what the tone was in the country or in the world, all of those things factored into how we were treated. We were used strictly as tools by the Vietnamese to further their own cause, and I'm not necessarily finding fault with that, but that was the truth. They knew that we had some value to them. I think Ho Chi Minh was perhaps the wise one who recognized that early on because he'd endured the prison experience and had a lot of experience working with the French, so his captors, so he knew about such things. We were learning it all from the ground up, but we did have good guidance at the few times that we had contact with our leadership, but the leadership was kept isolated quite well through most of our prison experience. There were very few of the leaders who ever had any contact with the rest of us.
Let's speak a little bit about leadership, because you speak with great admiration, and justifiably so, of then Commander Stockdale.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this the other day, was extraordinary in some ways was that Commander Stockdale's leadership was for all intents and purposes, virtual. No one ever saw him.
Right.
And yet, not only did his leadership endure and hold you intact, but it was very evident that if Commander Stockdale would be killed, the next person in line would step up, and those same precepts would be carried
Mm-hmm.
out. There was a many-headed hydra. Every head you cut off, another two would appear. Speak to me, if you can, about Stockdale, about how you experienced him through the walls.
I never had any contact with him at all over there, but we had his guidelines that were passed down. Sometimes, it might have taken months for something that he had, some guideline he had developed to reach any of us as individuals. If you just happen to be lucky and were within a few cells of him, you might hear it the same day, within hours. But most of the time, no, it took a long time. And of course, the meaning can get lost, as it did sometimes, I suppose. But in general, it was clear that we did have a leader. And being military men, we naturally and I think even subconsciously sought leadership. We needed leadership. That's not that we were weak or anything, but that's the way we were trained. We were brought to have leadership. And he provided that, as did Jerry Denton. I can't think of the others with whom I had any contact, but yeah.
Bill Lawrence.
Well, I never had any contact with him either. They were all kept far enough from wherever I was that I never had any direct contact with them. They were aware of what we were doing to some extent. CAG Stockdale being responsible for all of us in so many ways, in every way. I was a primary communicator in the cells that I was in. I just thought it's something that needed to be done, and I could do it, and I was good at it, and so I was a communicator. Well, after we returned home, I was recognized, along with others who did that same sort of thing, by him, because it was an integral part of maintaining a unit cohesiveness, which we needed as military people.
Say a little bit more about what it means to be a prime communicator. What is that?
To be a what?
To be a prime communicator.
Well, communications in that environment is a little different from what it is in a peacetime environment, but those of us who were communicators were hanging our butts out. We were the ones tapping on the wall to the next cell. We were the ones up in the window doing hand signals to anybody out there that we could get to. And generally speaking, particularly at what we called the Hilton, we had large cells. The cell that I was in most of the time had 60 to 65 of us in there. The cell with which I communicated most of the time was a much smaller cell. They had 30 or 35 people in there. And so every day, at least once a day, I would be up in the window communicating with my counterpart in that small cell, and that was Ed Davis over there. And you get pretty good communicating with the same person over a period of time. And I was younger and much slimmer, and my fingers could fly pretty well. And we got to where we could actually communicate by hand code as fast as what we called our plate writers could write the information down on the ceramic plates that we had, or enamel plates, I guess they were, which is pretty darn good as far as I'm concerned. But we using shortcuts and code, what now is being used by our young people, you know, and all their various forms of communication, LOL and whatever. We had stuff like that. Not so much for the same purpose, but it was to get the communication done in a hurry, because that was a great morale builder. And CAG recognized that, all of our leadership recognized that, and I think those of us, the rest of us who gave it any thought, knew even if you got a piece of information from the States that was 2 years old, if you'd been there 5 years, that was new stuff. It was good to know. And indicative of that was when we found out about the pay raises. There had been dramatic pay raises while we were gone, plus promotions. And that gave us something to do. I was shot down as a junior lieutenant, and now I find out that I'm a lieutenant commander, and the pay scale's gone up by a factor of about 3, and geez, I'm rich. Well, not thinking that the price of everything at home had gone up 3 times as much as well, but it gave us something to do, occupied our minds.
This is beautiful. Talk to me a little bit about the, you developed a two-handed hand signals, set of hand signals with which you were able to communicate. I can't remember the name of it. A two-handed deaf-mute code, was it?
Well, yeah, this all started out with the deaf-mute code, which I'm not sure which, if there was just one prisoner. I think it might have been my good friend Red Berg, because he had a deaf-mute sister. And so he'd been brought up with us, and he understood it very well. But the I don't know what the name of it is, International Deaf-Mute Code or whatever, is a one-handed code, and it's designed for in-close work, talking with somebody, and using the hands to give part of the information as facial signals and head nods and one thing and another, do the rest of it. And the people who use this with any great regularity are incredibly fast and incredibly expressive as well. But that's only good up close. When you now need to communicate with a building that's 200 feet away, you can't tell the difference between a one-handed symbol, almost any, whichever one you use. So we had to, for long distance communications, and we'd been there a few years before we got an opportunity to do this. We developed a two-hand code, and it was very intuitive. For instance, in the deaf-mute code, the one would be A, or at least that's the way we got it, was A. And B would be like this. In the two-hand, you go that, well, that's pretty easy to understand. So if you're trying to instruct someone in the use of the code, this became a whole lot easier, because now, as soon as you go through a couple letters, you do this now for B, they get the idea, okay, C's gonna look like this, and okay, D's gonna look like this. That worked out pretty well, although if we were close enough within 50, 75 feet or so, we could in most cases use the one-hand code. And those of us who were prime communicators were adept at those and tap code and everything else that there was. Anytime you could see or hear another POW, you could communicate with them.
Would you mind just spelling out to me at this distance the word honor in the two-handed code?
Honor?
Yes, sir.
Well, oh, in the two-handed code?
Or whichever.
Well, in one-hand code, this would be Honor. Now, I used to be able to do that really fast, but I'm old and got arthritis. Plus, I'm out of shape.
That's great. Thank you, sir. How are you doing? Would you like to take a little break?
No, I'm fine for as long as you want to go.
Okay, just let me know, because
Yeah.
I certainly want to make sure that, do you need to cool down the house a little bit? Are you okay? Okay. Oh, you mentioned the clay plates and the ways that you made use of time. You had 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
There were different things you wanted to do. First of all, how the clay plates were drawn on.
These were enamel plates.
Yeah, and for writing implements, can you tell that story?
Oh, the writing implements, well, in this case, for writing on enamel plates, which are very smooth surface, we needed graphite from a lead pencil. And what we would do when we went to interrogation, which we called quiz, if you go to quiz and it had an opportunity, there were almost always pencils in there. You didn't dare steal a whole pencil, because if you got caught stealing a whole pencil, you might not even survive it, depending on what the conditions were in camp at that time. But you'd certainly pay for it one way or another. But if you happen to drop a pencil, or when the interrogator wasn't looking, you break off the point somehow, now it's just a broken point. The pencil's still there. You keep the point and leave the pencil there where it's supposed to be, whether it make it appear to be an accidental thing or just he isn't aware of it at all. Now you take that piece of lead, which might be 1/4 of an inch long or 3/8 of an inch long, take it back to your cell, and on the occasions when we would get French bread, which, as I think you've probably learned, is not what most people would think of as French bread, but it looked like it, you'd take some of the inside of it, the soft part, and you could roll it up in your fingers, and very quickly it would become like clay, and make it up into something that would resemble a handle or the shaft of a pencil, and then inject that piece of lead into the end of it, and then let it dry overnight. And you might even wet it to help that whole process. Let it dry overnight, and the next day you have a nice firm pencil with a 1/4 inch of lead on it, and that 1/4 inch will write on that enamel plate for months.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, we were rather ingenious.
And you didn't stop there. You invented as you went. You, at one point, decided you wanted to sew something together. Can you tell me about that story, sir?
Yeah, that might have been ill-advised in my case. With nothing to do, you think of weird things, and we had these pajamas, these great big legs on them, and not very attractive. Not that it made any difference at all, but you'd have nothing else to think about, so I don't know what the old stories. New Year's Eve seemed like a good idea at the time. I thought, well, I'll tailor a set of these just for something to do. And so I found that you could remove a thread from a blanket, and you could get a 4 or 5 foot length of thread out of a blanket to do your sewing with. Now you needed a needle. And in my case, I found a fragment of bone. I don't recall what it came from. And I was able to, when we were around any concrete, or stone, you could grind this thing down and get it the shape you wanted and get it very sharp, as a needle should be. How I made the hole in it, I don't recall. It might have been, we got to shave once a month, and I might have taken the razor's end and made it, I'm just not sure. And made a needle, a rather decent needle. And with that needle and that thread, and used the razor blade when we only had access to them when we were allowed to shave. Then quickly cut the pants the way I wanted them, and reduced the leg width by about half, and sewed it up from the inside, turned it inside out, and whatever. I had a pretty decent looking pair of pants, you know. And I wasn't trying to keep anything from the Vietnamese. They could see it. The problem was, not too long after I finished this nice pair of pants and feeling pretty good about it, we had an escape. Not from our prison, but what we call the annex to the zoo. 2 guys escaped from there. And shortly thereafter, the Vietnamese, of course, conducted a purge to try to determine what was going on in the camp, who was responsible for this, is there an escape committee, are there other prisoners planning an escape and what have you. And I'm sitting there with these tailored pants thinking, oh my God, this is not going to be good, because it looks like I'm getting ready to go next.
You also sewed together a small satchel. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I happened to be lucky enough to be what in those days we referred to as a letter writer. I was one that I'll never know why, one of the prisoners that was allowed to receive mail from my wife, and she sent pictures on occasion. I have no idea how many letters she sent. I think I received in total about 5 or 6 while I was there, and quite a good number of pictures. And I wanted some way to keep them safe, because we were living in a high humidity environment, high heat and high humidity, and I figured they wouldn't last too long if I didn't fashion something. So I made a pouch that would hold these pictures, and did all the sewing with my needle and thread from my blanket. Now my blanket got more and more threadbare, of course, as time went on, but it wasn't much good anyway.
Beautiful story. You tell a story of, Porter Halliburton asked me to have you tell the story of when he was declared KIA, and do you know that? Do you recall that story, sir?
I remember his shoot down quite vividly. It was a rather hairy day. It was in September, I think, of '65. And we were doing a big alpha strike on a bridge north of Hanoi, inland quite a ways. And so we were going to get to it by going up the coast towards the China border, and well short of the Chinese border, turning inland and going up there until we got to that bridge, doing the attack and then exiting the same way. Well, the prime strike force was 4 flights of 4 A4s apiece, so 16 A4s, and we went in a diamond of diamonds. Well, in a diamond formation, you've got the leader, a wingman on either side, and then a slot man, just like the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds. That's the way they fly. We had no intention of trying to compete with them, but it's a very workable formation for doing what we were going to do. So there were 16 A4s, and then we had escorts. We had 2 F4s on either side of the formation, so that was 4. And then we had a tar cap behind us on our way out. They'd be guarding us against MiGs coming in on us or whatever. But on the way in, I was a slot man in the slot formation, and we were going in at low level. So lead is trying to fly at about 100 feet. And in formation, everybody flying off the lead is stepped down. So by the time you get back to tail end Charlie, which was me, in that tail end formation, I was in the weeds. I mean, I came back with grass stains. But as we were going in, I heard a call as we were crossing an area that we called Happy Valley. It was a low, wide valley with a lot of grass in it, and a lot of 37 millimeter, which looked like white cotton balls out there at about 100 feet. And we were just getting through to the other side of that, and I heard one of the F4s on the right side. The fellow's name was Tubby Johnson. I heard him call, "I've been hit." And I looked out and didn't see anything in particular, but I didn't have a long time to look because I was down zipping through the weeds at 500 knots. And then he says, I'm heading back. And I looked up and I saw him peel off and head back. It turns out he had had an engine shot out. There are 2 engines in the F4, and when I looked at the airplane when I got back to the ship, one engine bay was empty. Nothing but wires and hoses and things sticking in it. The whole engine was gone. He made it back and trapped on the ship with that one engine. Nice job. I think it was when I looked out and I saw him peel off, I thought I saw some other motion. I came back quickly to what I was doing, and I looked out again. Now, I can't recall if Porter called or not, but I saw an F4 hit the top of a karst outcropping, which was probably only 75 or 100 feet high, and it went in with a big ball of fire, and I instinctively looked behind it and saw no parachute. Well, obviously those guys are dead. So we get back to the ship, and we made the report, and the Admiral Rady, was very interested in finding out just what had happened. Well, I was the only guy who had seen the whole thing. So I got to brief the Admiral on that, and he said, "Is there any chance any of them got out?" "No, sir." "There's no way. 100 feet, they got hit after their wingman had been hit? No way, and no parachute." So, okay, he's KIA. So it was reported, that we came later on to make reports in the MIA regardless. But at that time, if somebody was obviously KIA, he was KIA. So it got reported that way, and poor Porter was dead, and it turned out his pilot was dead, but Porter made it out just fine. How the hell he did it, I don't know, because I didn't see him. But anyway, this was reported back home to his wife, and you probably have the story about the headstone and all of that.
No, I don't.
Well, I can't tell it certainly as well as Porter, but anyway, she had a service back in I guess it was back at Oceana, and had a headstone and everything, and I can't recall, it was erected in a local cemetery or whatever, and that was over until a year later. For some reason or other, I was selected to write a letter back home. And I did, and in the meantime, I'd thought up ways of doing a homemade, which is encode various information in the letter so it would go out and look like it was a normal letter, but there'd be information in it. I included the names and identifiers of, I think, 4 guys that we had there that was pretty well assumed that it wasn't known that they were prisoners. And he was one, Fred Purrington was another, Tom Browning, and I don't know, I forgot the other one, but 4 guys, I got names out, and I won't discuss how, but they went out in this letter. So this was picked up by intelligence. Here's this long, chatty letter that I'd written about my insurance policies and make sure you pay, $117.92 on that. Well, you do what you can. And so they picked up on it, and they got to his wife and said, Porter's alive, he's a prisoner.
Was there a time when you encountered Porter Halliburton in the Hanoi system and let him know he was KIA? Because he asked me to ask you about not only when he was declared KIA, but when you told him he was KIA. Do you remember that?
I'm not sure now.
Okay.
It's not fresh in my mind. I'd have to think about it.
No worries. And on the last of the anecdotal stories, you developed a technique with shoes and the slop bucket, did you not?
Now, that wasn't mine.
Oh, it wasn't yours?
No, I didn't develop it. No, I'd like to take credit for it, but no, I don't. I have no idea who developed it. It's one of those things that you say, why didn't I think of that? It's the simplest, smartest thing in the world, which didn't take a genius to come up with. But prior to my learning about it, when we were using the bucket, and keep in mind that most of us did not have normal bowel movements at that time. Diarrhea was modus operandi. And so when you're using a bucket, you're sitting on a bucket. That thing probably held, I don't know, 2.5, 3 gallons or something. It wasn't all that big, maybe 3 to 4 gallons. And it's just a bucket, or a pail, a straight-sided pail. It wasn't designed to do anything other than deposit from a respectful distance. And that made life difficult. And you didn't want to sit on the edge of it because it was usually full or close to full, which meant that you were probably going to get soiled. And there were times that you had to stay right there on the pot or very close to it. So somebody said, we'll take our go-aheads, the flip-flops, off and set them on the side of the bucket, the pail, and sit on them. And I tried that, and I said, oh, man, now you can sit here for as long as it takes to do what you have to do, or to avoid, horrific accidents and whatever. And we even had times if you weren't, if there's just one bucket and there's two guys in the room, but the other guy maybe get off of there, I gotta go. But no, it worked very, very well. And now if anything got dirty, it was just the flip-flops, and those were going to be a whole lot easier to clean than what you might mess up otherwise. I don't know who developed that, but he deserves a lot of credit.
Wonderful. I'm going to stop and take a little bit of a break.
Sure.
Let you stand up, and Carrie, can you help with Al's